Thanks for tuning in to this week's show. Joining us today is Mike Moloney, a multi-passionate entrepreneur who is always building something. He most recently launched FilterGrade, a marketplace where you can find and purchase digital products from your favorite creators. Additionally, Mike is the co-founder of GlutenBee, a health site offering informational content that will help you learn more about gluten-related diet issues. He's also a photographer, and he's in the process of building a creative agency. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey Ashley, thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to sharing more of my journey and learning about yours as well.
Likewise. So please feel free to dive right in and share more with our audience about you and what you do.
Sure. So again, Mike Moloney here. I'm a founder and entrepreneur. I've been building websites and businesses for about a decade now. I actually got my start in high school. I was kind of playing around with Photoshop and photo editing, and I learned about what's called Photoshop Actions, which is essentially a form of a filter, which down the road led to the creation of FilterGrade, through one way or another. And from there, I've done other websites and web businesses. And so basically, I just focus on building communities online, whether it's, for photography and video with FilterGrade or now GlutenBee, as I have a gluten allergy myself. And so that's kind of been my journey. I actually, when I was doing Filter is actually a bit older. It started in 2013. So when I had done that, few years into it is when I was supposed to go to college, and I went to one semester at UMass Amherst, gave that a shot, but ultimately the business was starting to grow and I felt this passion, pulling me to it, and I just couldn't ignore it. And so after the first semester of freshman year, I dropped out of college, and since then have just been building, internet businesses, with FilterGrade being the main one. GlutenBee is a newer one, and then as you mentioned, the creative agency is kind of the next phase as we get more into photo and video production.
Love it. And I was so excited to have you on as a guest because just reading about you prior to you coming on the show, I was like, I feel like both of our stories are very aligned in terms of timing and getting started. And I was in the same boat as you, where I really got started with my marketing agency, which I do now, technically in high school. And then in college, same thing. I was running my business, but I did end up going through all 4 years of school, but it got to the point where like I was taking marketing classes and developing learning how to develop marketing strategies. And I'm like, but I'm already charging people for this. And I'm learning about something I technically already know. So it's kind of
Right.
like a
Yeah.
weird thing to go through at that time, which I guarantee you understand as well.
Yeah. No, I can totally relate to that. And I think for me, it was definitely a timing thing. I think it's great to go to school, and I think there's a lot of benefits, especially on the social aspect and meeting and networking. That's one area where I kind of wish I would have found a way to make both work, you know what I mean? Because it's so
Yeah.
valuable, but totally agree with you. I had the same experience where I was ultimately just taking classes of things that I had already been doing or was implementing in my own business. And I didn't want to have to dedicate all that time to homework and things like that when I could just put it all into the business, And so it's a tough
Yeah.
dilemma for a lot of people who start a business, before college, during college, or whatever.
Exactly. And especially because with what we do, it doesn't really require a college degree. I mean, you can just get experience like you did and just teach yourself and then be able to take off and grow from there. So it's kind of that question of contemplating, should I pursue this path of getting a traditional education, or should I just go all in on my business? And I think it's so exciting that you chose the latter and really went all in on being able to continue to grow things.
Yeah, yeah, it's been an exciting journey, definitely a lot of ups and downs, but I appreciate that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with FilterGrade specifically, you had mentioned that you really found out about filters through Photoshop back in 2013. And so what was that almost like aha moment that made you realize it was something you wanted to use to turn into a business?
Oh, that's a great one. So what was really happening is at that point I was selling filters on this marketplace called Envato. A lot of people have probably heard of Envato Elements, stuff
Hmm.
like that. And I was selling a bunch of them just through my name, just like Mike Moloney Designs or something like that. And I got really into it because at that age, that was all I was focused on outside of school and sports. So I was like, in the forums, meeting people. And one of the people I'd met, his name's Adam McIntyre. He's a really talented entrepreneur. He has a few websites in similar spaces. And he was a moderator on the forum. And he actually encouraged me to look into, building a website, build your own business, all these things. And at the time, I think I had already started a few of my other websites, like just design blogs, but I had never done e-commerce specifically like for digital products too. And so between getting into exploring it and also his encouragement and assistance as both a mentor and just someone who was very helpful with branding and all these things, it kind of was the right combination of events that really like it forced the aha moment. Like that, it was December of 2013 when I kind of just sat down and did it through, a lot of encouragement. I just started making the products and the brand FilterGrade, and then later in 2014 is when like the site came to be, and that was sort of, I would call like the first aha moment in terms of building a brand and a business. And then the second one would be kind of 2 or 3 more years into FilterGrade, when we decided to become a marketplace. And so at that point, my brother had joined on as co-founder, and he was helping a lot with marketing and partnerships. And we noticed this trend, like it was, I think, the summer of 2016, maybe 17. It's been a while, now, but we were noticing that influencers were starting to like promote Lightroom presets, which is like
Yeah.
Lightroom version of a filter, and I'm sure a lot of people who are in marketing space may have come across it, especially photographers. And so at that time, Instagram was still kind of, in a sense, newer, and a lot of photographers were getting benefit from like the growth of the app as a whole. And so there was all these people with audiences, and it was like the Wild West. There was no link tree yet. There was no, not as many payment platforms or checkout solutions. And so seeing that, I remember following a few different influencers, and I saw them kind of starting to like mention presets, and I was like, this seems like an interesting idea. Like in terms of what if we could find a way to make it work where they would make a product, like partner with us, sell it on our site. We help manage the logistics, the processing, the delivery of the files, which back then was also a bit more difficult. And then all they have to do is just post a link on their Instagram story, their page, and say, hey, I have presets or brushes or whatever for sale. And so the first person that did it, it was more like a direct, we did like a contract, we paid them. It was almost like a sponsorship. And then
Mm.
we tried it, sold the product, and it started doing well. And we were like, wow, this is cool. And so after that, we decided to build out like a model for a marketplace. And that's where we said, okay, let's partner with people for these terms, which are the same today, 70-30 split. The creator gets 70% of their revenue, and we get 30% as, to help with processing and all the other fees that, are associated. And so we started pitching this to similar creators, like related to the one that we had already discovered, or just people we followed, my brother and I, and it became very, we got some momentum, you know what I mean? And so at that point, we went all in on partnerships and conversations, and we were just on the phone every day. And we signed on maybe, I want to say, 150 like sellers or vendors, to the
Wow.
marketplace that year. And it was very much more direct relationships, very boutique at that point, which was, I think, one of the reasons it was successful in the beginning and very popular within a specific niche. But we did that, and that was like sort of the aha moment. And then from there, that was like a wave of momentum that carried us into just scaling the marketplace, learning things from that. We made some mistakes along the way, like in terms of, I think, scaling and structure, but it was a great like push to help us like solidify the business. Because when I dropped out of college, it was literally making like $1,000 a month. It was not a business that was sustainable to build a career on for myself or, a team. But then
Mm.
through building a marketplace, we were able to reach the scale to pay ourselves, pay employees, and then, be like, in terms of like in the industry that we were in, be more stable and notable. So it was cool, to be able to actually reach that. Um,
Yeah. And there's a few things that you mentioned in that story that I want to reiterate because I think they're really good pieces of advice. One being that you had decided to get off of the marketplace you were previously on and start your own, which I think is so important from a business sales and marketing standpoint, because then you have full control over your own marketplace. And you're not kind of at the liberty of that other marketplace where if they were to shut down or what have you, like, is your business still viable and is your business still existing? Which one is one of the things I always like remind people is don't put all of your eggs in one basket. And so I think that was a smart move of just transitioning from someone else's property to your own property. And then I also love the idea of just building partnerships and relationships because it's that organic grassroots marketing and sales technique that can really help to bring in a lot of different opportunities that then makes it easier for you to scale down the line once you get that traction.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate you saying that. It definitely helped to go with that methodology. It was always an organic marketing based effort for us because we didn't really have resources. We didn't raise any money. And so it was always about what types of methods, like especially word of mouth, cold outreach, stuff like that, can we use that mainly just require time and effort versus, having heavy pockets.
Absolutely. And it also provides another revenue stream for creators. So, like for
Yeah.
example, I've worked with a handful of photographers, and that's one thing they do for passive income is being able to sell those Lightroom presets, especially because it's they create it once and then they sell it and boom, they have money coming in. But a lot of them also really love the opportunity to educate other photographers. So they get the chance to work with their clients, but then also support others in the industry. And you provided them with a platform and a way to make that happen.
Yeah. And that was, to me, that was the exciting part because I was already a photographer before I started FilterGrade, and now I'm actually pursuing it even more, seriously than I did during kind of like the core time I ran the company. And that's really what it was about. Is like for me, I do some of these things already. I sell stock photos for passive income. I sell my own presets. I have, clients as well, like you said. And it's like being able to not only generate a passive income, but also give back to the community, share something cool and new and fun. Like that was what was interesting to me throughout the growth of Filtrate is that some of the reasons creators wanted to sell their presets and still do to this day or other products aren't always just the obvious ones that you would think about. Like there's always going to be a need to, sustain our businesses as creators. So we have to have income streams, but I didn't expect as many people to care about some of the branding and sort of things like that, features that we offer, like profiles and other things, because I think some people take, their career so seriously and it's a beautiful thing to see. And everything they do, they want to have it kind of aligned. They want to have a cool image. And that was the fun part for me is like we would work directly, especially before now we have like 1,000 or more sellers, maybe even 2,000. I don't know how many are fully active, but when we were only had a 100 to 200 sellers, it was very easy for my brother Matt and I to like dedicate a lot more time to people, and we could do cool like launches for products or fun little things that were like more interactive with the fans or with other photographers in the community. And that I love the excitement of being able to be a part of a community, especially when it's people that all have similar goals and want to help each other.
Absolutely. And once you got to the first 150 creators on the platform in that first year, from there, were you still doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of cold outreach and building relationships and connecting with others? Or did it end up getting to a point where it kind of just sustained itself and was able to continue growing on its own? Almost like it got to the point where it was, I don't want to necessarily say automated, but just kind of getting to that level where it's almost doing the work on its own.
Yeah, that was kind of the next phase. So after about like 200 sellers, then it was difficult, I will say, because the challenges were like a few different things. One was like figuring out how to pay that many people, through that's still not automated. There's systems we have, but it's not like, it just goes out every month and I don't have to do anything. But because it never got to the point where we could spend the development cost to build that stuff. But
Mm.
through like those next few years after reaching about 200 sellers is when we invested in building like a front end solution for people to apply and join without much touch points from us. Like we review sellers, but other than that, once we review them, they're able to just join the site, start selling, and there's not a lot of friction there. And so that was the hardest next step, is just building all that, ironing out the bugs. And then I'm trying to think of what else came up because I remember there was a few other things, mainly like also just figuring out the logistics of the next phase, because
Mm.
it went from being a direct like relationship thing to more like we need to make it easy for people with a lot of different creative backgrounds to join. And so, for example, we have people from, I don't know, like a lot of different parts of the world, but there's people who are selling like things that are more used with design and brushes and colors versus people selling video editing, like filters or templates, which there's so many different kind of specific reasons and groups for that. And so that was sort of the next challenge, is figuring out how can we serve a larger amount of people, because originally it was really like presets. Like FilterGrade's early slogan was called like filters from your favorite photographer. And so in the beginning it was that. It was like
Mm,
photography, photographers, editing. It was kind of easy because it was like grouped. But then at a certain point that started to become very saturated because it was a viable source for just anyone. And so
right.
because it was so heavily utilized, we had to pivot a bit to say, okay, what else could we offer that's similar enough to where it's not, because we didn't go the route of like selling stock photos and videos, but similar to photo filters, but also in a lot of different use cases. And so that's where video came in, and then design and templates and social media. But that was sort of the next phase, I would say, is building out more infrastructure, and then
Mm,
seeing if we could, if it could scale. And that, I will say that, we had a couple really good years. And then around like 2018 or so is when or maybe like closer to 2020, it was slightly coinciding with COVID, but things started to just decline because of priorities change for creators. Certain people are doing things differently now, especially like independently a lot more. And so it was a really cool experience to, see all sides of it, the ups and the downs for sure.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the most interesting and exciting parts of entrepreneurship, but also the challenging is when you get to those plateaus because you know that you've already reached amazing growth getting up to that point, but now you're at this point where you're like, okay, I've reached X amount of growth, but I want to keep growing. And now what do I need to do in order to achieve that growth? And it's kind of like those tiers that you just keep going up, almost like a pyramid. And so I think it's fun to kind of problem solve in that aspect, but it can also be definitely challenging, especially when you're so close to the business. It's almost, I feel like for me, it's almost hard to have like an outside or external perspective on it because I'm just so stuck in the day to day.
Yeah, that's the hard part, is like sometimes not being able to like know what's right from wrong in terms of where to go next. Because you can take in advice from everyone, and I'm always grateful for it. But at the end of the day, as the entrepreneur, we always have to make those really tough decisions, and that's where it's thrilling, but it can be hard, and it's definitely good to have a network around you of other entrepreneurs to talk to and vent to and stuff like that for sure.
Absolutely. And one thing that we've chatted about briefly throughout the show is that you're multi passionate. So you have several projects that you're focusing on. And I'd love if you could talk a little bit more about them and how you also balance them all without feeling like you're taking time away from another. So, kind of what your process is for being able to give all of them as much time and effort as they need without letting others suffer, if that makes sense.
That's a really good question as well. And a lot of people have different schools of thought on this. Like some people are very much, you have to go all in on one business, otherwise, everything's going to fail. Other people are like, oh, I'd rather manage a couple little things. And I'm kind of on that side. To me, it's more exciting because I have so many different interests as a person. And so as a businessman, why can't I explore those, And it doesn't always work. There's been a lot of failed side projects, little businesses, but right now, the reason I've been able to dedicate a bit more time and balance it is with FilterGrade kind of transitioning from, where it was the main focus. It's kind of gone back on almost like a back burner for me. So like you mentioned, a lot of things are automated now. I can just do it a little bit, a couple hours a day, as opposed to being a full-time thing now. And with that, I've pushed a lot more of my effort into the creative agency. And so for that, it's called Moloney Creative Agency, named after, our name. And so it's really just photo and video production. And because my brother and I had been doing it for so long before the company, during the company, and even, now while we're just kind of independently doing this agency, it felt like it was almost natural to get into it as a career path. And so with that, we're still kind of finding our footing as an agency. It's a different world for sure versus freelancing, but we're really just trying to tell stories, especially like video documentary stories. That's really what we love to do. Commercial type stuff. Sometimes more for film or sometimes more for, social media and advertising. But that's kind of the focus now. My brother moved to New York earlier this year, and so we're kind of trying to build out a business between, the two states and in this region, and just
Mm.
serve a lot of clients related to that. And then outside of doing the agency, which takes up a lot of like time in terms of physical shoots and editing, whatever, being gluten free, I started GlutenBee. I actually started that with Adam as well, the person I mentioned, the mentor and friend of mine, and we started it way back in 2017, like almost like a side project because I'd kind of think it was a few years earlier. I forget the exact timing, but I, figured out I had a gluten allergy or gluten intolerance, and then because of that, mentioned it to him a bunch. We started talking. We were like, oh, like maybe we could try exploring this for a content website, and so did that. Ran it for a couple of years. It was good, but it was kind of small. And at a certain point, Adam was just, ready to focus on his other projects. So, being the smart entrepreneur he is, he sold his half of it. I bought him out, and he was able to take that some of that money and use it for other projects, which is something that's definitely one of the lessons that I'm trying to get into more, is not always just buying new projects or joining them, but selling some and being good at both sides of it. But anyways, like after that, I kind of kept running the website as a website, and then more recently I've been really investing in mainly just my time and efforts into capturing videos of food, especially building
Mm.
out somewhat of a not a map, but just like a catalog of videos of restaurants, good products, things like that. Because for me, being gluten free, the early years were really tough. Just figuring out what I could eat, what's safe, all these things. And so going through that myself, I decided to just put it into the website, whether it was like helpful articles about just like definitions or things like that. But then more so, the ones that helped the site grow the most were about questions like, is sriracha gluten free? That was like the first one that I was in the store and I looked at it and there was no label. So I was like, oh, I wonder
Yeah.
what it is. I was like, this could be an opportunity. So I decided to, go on their website, found the ingredients, blah, 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 put together an article, and that was kind of how it started. And then from there, I've just been building that kind of stuff out whenever, I personally come across something or just film it. And that's sort of been like a passion of mine. And I think what I like about GlutenBee is that it started as a side project, and it also has been, I've always been passionate about food even before the allergy, but now I have to be more specific and kind of like research based about it. And so I like that I'm able to build a website and a business around something that's kind of like natural to me already. I have to eat and it's easy to film it. So it's just been a kind of a nice synergy of like those things. And also it's not as stressful of a business with like,
Right.
right now it's just ad revenue. I don't really know like what will be next, maybe products, but it's just nice not having like as much stress related with like the more people you work with the business, the more customer support and all that. And running a marketplace, there was a lot of it. And so
Yeah.
having, a different business that was sort of like basically I like to describe it as quiet. Like I just log in, I write blog posts, I post videos. There's nothing else. And so it was like so refreshing to have that balance. And that's why for me, it works so well to have both. You know what I mean? And to have a balance between a few different websites and agencies and businesses.
I love that. And what you just shared about not having to be so client facing with this reminds me of what a previous guest of ours had mentioned. It was Dale Shabijan, and he owns also a marketing agency, and he owns a bakery on the Cape, which is really interesting. But what he had said is that with his bakery, he loves doing that because if someone's unhappy with the $5 muffin they buy, he hands them their $5 back, and that's the end of their relationship.
Yeah.
Compared to an agency where if you have an unsatisfied or dissatisfied client, like you constantly have to kind of deal with them unless the
Oh yeah.
relationship terminates. And
Yeah.
so, like you said, it's nice to have that balance of something you can almost do behind the scenes and independently while also balancing it with something that you're doing with other people or having that client facing role.
Yeah, no, that is awesome to hear about. I gotta listen to his episode. That's really cool. I couldn't agree more, and that's so funny, like the way he described the differences, because I feel literally the same way. It's just like it's just a peaceful, almost like escape from the main business.
Right. Like there's no pressure to really show up. You can just kind of do it on your time when you want to. There's really no deadlines. I think that part of it is really nice. And I was
Definitely.
really interested by GlutenBee when I had first found about it when I booked you to come on the show because that's how I got into starting my marketing agency is I had a blog and I've just always loved to write and I've always loved the idea of blogging. And so one thing that I wanted to ask you about and get your perspective on is how do you set the time and creative energy to be able to create new content all the time? Because I feel like if I write one blog post, I'm like, okay, my brain needs a break after this.
That is such a good question, and that is one of the biggest struggles for me over the years with all of the websites I've run. With FilterGrade, what happened was it was just to give you a quick overview because this was separate or very different from GlutenBee, but it got to the point where, like you said, we scaled, we had a lot of stuff going on, so I hired writers there. It was very much just a basis of like communicating ideas for topics that fit our audience, getting them written and
Mhm.
getting them published. With GlutenBee, that's been the struggle because it's always kind of been I haven't hired a ton of writers there, maybe a few early on, especially when Adam and I did it together. But once I took over, I didn't have any real like income to pay for writers consistently. So I said, all right, what can I do? And so two things that helped me that I think I would tell every blogger to adopt. The first and like biggest one is figuring out content formats. So like with GlutenBee, I described to you like the one about sriracha. And so that's an
Mhm.
easy format that after making sriracha and like 5 or 10 more of those types, I was able to make like a template, which it's not really like anything special. It's just you write the article and then I just copy and paste it for the future ones. But instead of having to do it from scratch every time, like certain blog posts, it was very much like I write an intro about like what is the product or product type, and then I say like literally like a sentence like let's find out if this is gluten free. Have a lot like a separator. Have the question in bold and the answer. Have the evidence and have this. And so it was like very for me. I'm like I work well with templates and things like that, and so
Mhm.
it made it so if I found a product in the store, I would just start making these over and over again. And it cut down the time from maybe an hour to like 20 minutes or less, where it's just like
Yeah.
find these few things, insert them, add the links, you're done. And then another thing, the cover image, same thing. There's a template. Adam and I did, I think Adam designed it, and we always did this for the blog because it helps with branding, but just quickly make the cover image with the template, post it. And it's just one more thing that helps to prevent like the lack of a post because we have such easy things to make it you know go live. And then I would say like the second biggest thing with for me personally, I already kind of mentioned it, but it would be like curiosity. And so with gluten bee, because I'm always trying to discover new food products or if something is or isn't gluten free, whatever, it's easy for me to like naturally come up with topics, ideas, and write like anytime I go to, let's say, like a new restaurant, I see this type of seltzer or cider, I can, if it's something rare I haven't seen before, that's an article idea. Or if it's an ingredient, like I didn't know what fennel was. And so I just wrote an article about that. And it's just little stuff like that. And I would say, like, I don't know if it's applicable to everyone, but for me, because even the same with FilterGrade, like as a photographer, I remember vividly this article did really well. It was like, I was filming a video and there was this high pitched sound. And I was like, what's the problem? So I researched it, found a few solutions, and I realized you can fix it with Premiere Pro with this one filter. So I wrote
Mm.
that article up, posted it, and it like consistently still to this day gets traffic. And it's because it was both a problem I had faced and it was just like the right like platform to post it on, you know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
that's what I would say would be the biggest thing is like number one is templates or content formats. And then number two is be super curious about whatever field you're in as long as you have to be passionate about it, otherwise
Oh,
it's going to be
seriously.
hard. But then
Yeah.
from there, let it kind of just give you the ideas for content. Think about the things that you get stumped upon, answer those questions. And it's like it doesn't always work. Sometimes the content falls flat, but generally speaking it leads to the right direction of growing your traffic and also building like a solid blog that's not just like very vague content. It's very specific or helpful to someone.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Such good advice here. And I think what really underlies everything that you just shared is that it sounds like you're creating a lot of content that's searchable, that people are going into Google and other search
Yeah,
engines and asking questions for themselves. Like, I feel like if I were to have a gluten allergy, that's something I would turn to Google for. Like, is such and such ingredient or such and such food gluten
yep,
free? And so you're just taking those questions and what people want to know about, like you mentioned, and turning it into really valuable content and helping to drive that website traffic, which I think is such a great and easy strategy for people to do.
thanks. Yeah, no, I agree. And I will say, like, even hearing you mention it, that is a good point in terms of like it is definitely a very specific approach I take with a lot of my businesses revolving around like SEO and content marketing. And so there's so many other ways to do it. But yeah, for me, that worked. And I found that because it's more of a accessible option for people as opposed to like running ads, you either need money, well, you need both money and to figure out how to run the ads. And like I've done it a lot over the years. It's not easy. Whereas like SEO, I feel like, and content and blogging, like a lot of people could do it. You really just put your mind to it and do it long enough and you find those, you know what I mean? And so that's
Yeah.
why for me, it was, I always try to like mention those things because it just seems like, I don't know. I was with even like a good example is social media. I love it and I study it, but I've never been as like good at some people that I see it like blowing up on there. And so that's why I always kind of go back to SEO and content because it's like the one thing that I actually kind of felt like I could figure out that was it didn't seem like you needed to always like manipulate the system or, you know, play around with algorithms. It's just like you just have to do things like solve problems, you know. So it's that
Yep.
was why I liked it, you know.
Right. And your advice too about having a template, I think is really great too. Just finding ways to further, not, I mean, it's not necessarily automated, but just further speed up the processes that you're doing, I think is really great. That's one of the things that I've found has helped too with blogging is that, I mean, an example of this for our listeners is how Mike and I met, but Mike had given a blurb to a blog post that I was writing about what entrepreneurs or what National Small Business Week means for entrepreneurs. And so that was very minimal work on my end because all I had to do was just get quotes from these business owners. I wrote a quick intro, wrote a quick conclusion paragraph, and then everyone else filled in the rest. And so it took me probably 20 minutes, but I was getting really great content to include in the blog post from other people. And then that also helps because those people are sharing the blog posts and getting traction to your site. And so I think exactly the tactic that you mentioned, Mike, of being able to find ways to speed up the process and just take the burden off your plate while still having that quality content is huge.
100%. Yeah. And no, I love your approach with your post too. I think that's something I didn't do a ton of, maybe a little bit with FilterGrade, but that's one of my favorite like templates is those style of posts. Like, cause it's such an easy thing for both parties. Like, and everyone is looking for more ways to get their name and brand out there through articles, and you're looking for new content. It's a win-win. I think if any blogger's stumped on, oh, what's a template? That's a perfect one to start with is like something
Seriously.
where you think of a good piece of advice in your niche, find experts and publish it. Or like you said, for Small Business Week or some like themed event, something happening during the calendar year, those are the perfect ways to kind of like get your foot into the door of blogging, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. And with all of the different projects that you have your hands in, how do you find time to have a work-life balance and make sure that you still have time for yourself and to recharge the creative batteries that can definitely get drained pretty quickly in the work that you do?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's been like challenging over the years trying to find that balance. I think you know, even early on, like dropping out of college was an example of not really finding the balance, but kind of in a sense, almost like going one direction too far, which was just like I was working too much on the business then,
Mm,
and I was struggling with, I would say, just figuring out like what, like I got so attached that as soon as things didn't always go well with FilterGrade, it was like very troubling for me mentally, and through that and some of the kind of growth that came from that, I learned like how important it is to be somewhat disconnected, you know, in a sense from your businesses too. You have to have your own life. You have to have things that you do outside of it, you know, even
mhm,
though, like I mentioned with GlutenBee, I'm always getting food videos, whatever. It's I did it because it was natural as opposed to with sometimes with FilterGrade, there was times where I found myself so stressed out doing things excessively like after hours or phone calls or whatever that it makes you not want to work anymore. And so I think
mhm.
like the biggest things that helped me, I would say would be like one, just getting into a better routine of like going to the gym or walking or getting exercise in so I can clear my head. And I always found like I used to like skip that kind of stuff to do work because I was like, oh, I need to get into work right away. I need to work every hour. And then I realized like when I slowed down, focused on my health, fitness, other things like that, I am working less, but I'm doing much more like dedicated and like good work, efficient work. And so it kind of worked out. I would say another big thing is just finding ways to disconnect from like work in general and just like find what you like. Like for me, I love hiking. And so being in New England, I go up to New Hampshire and Vermont a ton, and I try to just pick different trails, go on different adventures, and stuff like that. Getting outside, exploring the coastline, those types of things help me to realize like, what am I passionate about outside of the business and the work, and like how can I explore both, make it all work together, but still, have a good life without being like constantly worried about work or stressed.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, to hit your point home about like moving your body and exercising, that's one thing that I feel super strongly about too. Like my day has to start with a run. And so, exactly like what you mentioned, like there were so many times where I'd be like, I need this 1 hour to not run and focus on work, but then I'd find that my work was just terrible quality after that, or I'd spend so much more time working because it would take me longer because I wasn't focused or productive. And so I love that advice. And it's something I always will be have like as my non-negotiable really is being able to just work. And also too, like you mentioned, being able to have passions that are outside of the work that you do. I feel like I almost have to force myself not to monetize some of the passions that I have and
I
like
can totally relate to that. That's a really
just
good point. That's just an entrepreneurial problem. Let's
it
be honest.
is. It's like just letting passions be passions and not trying to make money off them or do
Yeah.
something with it, which that's a struggle is like feeling so excited about something and loving it so much and wanting to take it to the next level, but then realizing that if you do turn it into a business or a monetized project, like you might lose that passion. And so it's like finding that balance. It's so tough.
Yeah, and yeah, no, I can totally that's so funny because a lot of people I talk to who are whether it's like entrepreneurs like with businesses or more so influencers, the same thing. Everyone has that struggle of like it's almost too easy nowadays to just turn on that side of a passion, but it's like the mental stuff that comes with it is when it starts to be like, okay, like for example, for me, I have thought about like, oh, it'd be really cool to film hiking videos and all these things, and I'm like, wait, let me just keep this one thing to myself. Like, yes, I might take pictures and enjoy it, but I don't need to like, I need that separation still, and I think that's the most important part for sure.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. That's how I feel about reading. I'm a really big reader. And so, like for context, for our listeners, we're recording this episode end of July, and I'm almost at my 100th book for the year. So I read like a lot. And so there's been like constantly in the back of my mind, like I should start a book podcast. I should start a book blog. And but then I have to like force myself to stop and say, no, if you start one of those, then reading is almost going to feel like homework and going to feel
Yeah,
like a chore and something you have to do. And
yeah.
it's just so hard to like hold back and just let
100%.
something be something that you enjoy.
Yeah, and I mean, it's important. It's hard, but it is important, I think, because it's helpful to maintain those things. I haven't had any like gluten. I was a little worried about GlutenBee sometimes, like, oh, maybe it'll become too much like that. But it's as an entrepreneur, we have to find ways that we can keep that separation because you can always distinguish those things, and it's just ultimately just even up to any human to find ways to balance work and life. And I think that's why it's you got to keep some of those things close to your heart to just enjoy and you'll know yourself like even if that could change maybe down the road you're like you know what I have more time now it's time to do that book podcast but it's
Right.
all about giving yourself a bit of like the patience and kind of the freedom to explore things and when you feel it's right you know what I mean because that's for me what where those things have come to be because some of the best ideas come from passions but it's always a
Mm.
balance of some of your passions could fade when you pursue them so it's always determining which way you want to go with it and enjoying it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we're on the topic of having so many different passions and things we love to do, what would you say your favorite local businesses to support?
Oh, those are some good ones. So on the gluten bee note, I discovered this because of the allergy. Two good ones. I think the CEO of Be Good. So the first one's Be Good, and I'm pretty sure the CEO of that company started this other restaurant. It's called Grainmaker, and they're both in and around Boston. Grainmaker, I think, just has one location, maybe two, but it's this amazing like bowl restaurant, kind of similar to like a Cava or a Chipotle, but
Mm.
just like you go through the line, get some delicious bowls. I'm pretty sure it's 100% gluten free, and that one's awesome. And then Be Good's another one that I love. It's a like a small chain in like New England area. They have tons of good, sustainable food options, allergy friendly stuff like that. Another one that I want to shout out is I don't know if it's really like a small business, but it's more like a coalition. But it's called Massachusetts Production Coalition, and it's or MPC, and basically this organization that helps support filmmaking in Boston, like mainly I think like movie level filmmaking, you know what I mean? But there's tons of events and things they do for the community, like workshops, expos, all these things. And so they were really helpful to my brother and I and other friends of ours as creators in Boston. I think it's an awesome kind of company. And then after that, I'm trying to think of a few more. I want to shout a couple more. 'Cause I do. There's so many. There's a few agencies I really like in the Boston area. Boathouse is cool. Um, there's one called Com Creative, another great agency that does really cool advertising and marketing work in Massachusetts and all over. And then let me think of one more, like small one, or business that might be different because I don't want to do another restaurant. I already did. Let me think about this. Ah, I gotta I gotta come up with it. But oh, another good one is just I like a lot of the different art stuff in Boston. My
Hmm.
brother is like a painter as well, and so got into some of that. And I'm a big fan of like the SOA studios they have, and then there's a bunch of different studios around the city that I love. So I would just say like the art scene in Boston is another, not really a business, but another community I'm a huge fan of, and I think I love to try to support any way I can.
Absolutely. I love that. Mike, this has been such an awesome episode, and I've really enjoyed hearing more about your story and getting the opportunity to share it with our listeners. And now I'd love if you could share where they can find you online in case they'd like to connect with you further.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much, Ashley. I really enjoyed this episode. It was fun to be on here. The main places I'm online would be Instagram. It's just at MJMOLO. And then I have a Twitter that's at Moloney Mike. And then other than that, I just also have a portfolio website for the agency, which is MJMolo, the same one as the Instagram, just .com. And then the only other places is just, for people who are interested, check out FilterGrade and GlutenBee and all the other websites. I appreciate all the support.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will throw those links, all of those links in the show notes so that way our listeners can click through and connect with you from there. But thanks so much again for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. Have a good one. Appreciate it.